She fell asleep in the war Alpha King bed, while 59 women waited below. There is an old saying among the wolf women of the Ashvale Mountains: a river does not beg the stone to notice its current. It simply flows, and the stone is changed. Maren Voss had heard it from her grandmother, who had pressed a smooth river pebble into her palm when she was 7 years old and said, "Keep this. One day you will understand what it means to be the water." Maren kept the pebble. She wore it on a cord around her neck, cool and gray-green against her sternum, even on the days she had nothing else, especially on those days. She did not know, on the morning she set out for the citadel of Draveth, that the stone around her neck was about to become the most important thing she owned. She only knew she was tired, and the road was long, and she had nowhere left to go. Chapter 1. The Choosing. The choosing had not been Maren's idea. It had been the village elder Torvak's idea, because the village of Callow Bend owed Draveth Citadel 2 seasons of unpaid tithe, and sending a woman to the Alpha King's selection was cheaper than silver and less final than war. Torvak had stood in the square and named Maren Voss because she was the only unattached woman under 30 with no family powerful enough to protest. Wolfless, orphaned, occupying a rented room above the tallow-maker's shop. Convenient, Torvak had said, in the way that men say a word meaning the opposite of what it cost. She had been given a wool dress dyed the color of old moss and a pair of boots 1 size too large. No carriage. She walked the 30 miles to Draveth Citadel in 2 days, eating half a loaf of rye bread and drinking from streams, the pebble knocking softly against her chest with every step. The citadel rose from the spine of the mountain like something the mountain had decided to become. Black stone, narrow towers, and a gate so old that the iron had gone the color of dried blood. The women gathered outside it numbered exactly 59 by the time Maren arrived, and they were, to a one, extraordinary. Daughters of pack alphas, daughters of merchant lords, women who had shifted before they could walk, who wore their wolf grace in every line of their bodies, the particular looseness in the shoulders, the way their eyes caught light like animals. They wore silk and embroidered wool and jewels at their throats. They looked at Maren's moss-green dress and her 2 large boots and looked away again, the way you look away from a thing that embarrasses you on its behalf. A woman with copper hair wound in silver pins stood at the head of the group. She introduced herself as Isolde of Heron Point, and she did not introduce herself to Maren. A steward in gray livery emerged from the gate and read from a scroll. The Alpha King Cassian Drave would take meals with the candidates over 3 days. He would make his selection before the new moon. The women chosen would enter the citadel proper. The others would be escorted home with a tithe clearance writ, which was, as every woman in that courtyard knew, the entire point for the villages that had sent them. Maren needed that writ. She did not need anything else from Draveth Citadel or its king. She stood at the back of the group and tried not to think about how her feet hurt. Chapter 2. Stone and Water. The first meal was a disaster by Maren's reckoning and a triumph by everyone else's. The candidates dined in a long hall hung with smoke-darkened tapestries of battles Maren did not know the names of. Cassian Drave sat at the head of the table, and he was, she admitted it to herself plainly because she had no patience for pretending otherwise, startlingly present. Not merely handsome. Present in the way that a fire in a cold room is present. You are aware of it with your whole body before you consciously look. He was broad through the shoulders and dark-eyed, and had the particular exhaustion of someone who had been at war so recently that the war had not yet finished living in his face. There was a scar along his jaw, pale and precise as a line of text. He spoke to the women nearest him. Isolde laughed musically at something he said. Several candidates leaned forward in their chairs with the same angle, the same interested tilt, as though they had practiced it. Maren ate her food, genuinely excellent food, the first hot meal in 3 days, and watched the tapestries, and thought about the river saying her grandmother had given her. She was not here to flow against the stone of this man. She was here to collect a writ of tithe clearance and leave. She did not speak to the king. The king did not speak to her. After dinner, a steward led them to a corridor of candidate rooms. The rooms were small but clean. Iron bed frames, wool blankets, a basin of water. Marin's was the last door at the end of a long passage, furthest from the others. She was almost relieved. She washed her face, took off her boots, lay down with the pebble still around her neck, and thought she would rest for only a moment before organizing her thoughts about the tithe writ. She was asleep in under a minute. Chapter 3. The Wrong Door. She woke to candlelight. Not her candle. Her candle had been a stub. This was many candles, 4 or 5, set in iron holders. And the ceiling above her was not the ceiling of her candidate room. This ceiling was vaulted. The stones were veined with something pale. The bed beneath her was roughly twice the width of any bed she had previously encountered, and the blankets smelled of cedar and something else, something animal and dark. Marin sat up very slowly. The room was enormous. A writing desk, bookshelves, a weapon stand near the wall holding a sword that was clearly not decorative, a fireplace burning low orange, a window that showed the mountain dark and the stars hard and bright above the tree line. On the chair beside the desk sat Cassian Drave, Alpha King of Draveth, still in his dinner clothes, with his long legs stretched before him, and his arms folded, and an expression on his face that she could not immediately read. "You," he said, "are in my bed." The voice was not angry. It was careful. The way you are careful with something unexpected. "I appear to be." Marin looked at the door, which was closed. She looked at the window, which was not helpful. She looked down at herself, still in the moss-green dress, still wearing the 2 large boots she'd apparently fallen asleep in, and felt a complete and thorough mortification move through her like cold water. "The last candidate's room and the king's chambers share a connecting passage," he said. "The door between them is usually locked. Tonight the lock was faulty. I didn't—" She pressed her fingers to her sternum where the pebble lay. "I genuinely thought it was my room. The light was low and I had walked 30 miles over 2 days and I had not slept properly and I would never have— I know." The careful expression shifted slightly. "You've been asleep for 4 hours. I've been sitting in that chair for most of it." She looked at him. "You sat in the chair." "It's my room. I could hardly leave. You could have woken me." Something moved in his face. "You looked like you needed the sleep." It was such a strange thing to say that she didn't know what to do with it. She swung her legs off the bed and stood, and her feet, freed from the 2 large boots, which she had apparently unlaced in her sleep, met cold stone. "The 59 women downstairs," she said, "are going to have a great deal of opinions about this." "Yes." He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, elbows on knees. In this posture he looked less like a king and more like a man who was tired. "They are. Tell me something. What is your name?" "I don't recall it from the steward's list." "Marin Voss, Callow Bend. I'm here about a tithe writ, not a marriage." "Callow Bend sent you about a tithe writ." "Callow Bend sent me as a tithe writ, which is somewhat different, but the outcome I require is the same." He was quiet for a moment. In the firelight, the scar along his jaw was more visible, not ugly. Simply there, a fact about him. "Wolfless?" "Yes." "You came 30 miles on foot." "There was no carriage." He stood, and when he stood, the room shifted slightly in scale. He was very tall, and the room was already large, and Marin's 2 large boots were on the floor between them. She did not feel afraid. She felt, obscurely, the way she felt standing near a river in flood. Aware, alert, respectful of the force without being undone by it. "I will have a steward bring you back to your room," he said, "and I will have the lock on that door seen to." He paused. "Before you go, you were sleeping with something around your neck, a stone on a cord. You kept touching it even in your sleep." She looked down. The pebble rested against her dress, gray-green in the candlelight. "My grandmother's." "What does it mean?" She told him the river saying. She didn't know why she told him. Perhaps because it was 4 a.m, and she was in a strange king's chambers in her stockinged feet, and pretense required more energy than she had. A river does not beg the stone to notice its current. It simply flows, and the stone is changed. He looked at the pebble for a long moment. Then he looked at her face. "Sleep well, Maren Voss of Callow Bend." The steward came. She went back to her own room, lay down, and did not sleep again until dawn. Chapter 4. 59 Opinions. By morning everyone knew. She wasn't certain how. Perhaps a night servant had seen the steward escorting her through the corridors. Perhaps sound carried strangely in the citadel's old stone. But by the time Maren arrived at the breakfast table, the knowledge was already seated there waiting for her, wearing Isolde of Heron Point's expression. The wolfless girl from the tallow village. Isolde did not look up from her tea. "You went to his chambers." "I fell asleep in the wrong room." Maren took a seat at the far end of the table and poured herself tea with the steadiness she did not particularly feel. The lock on a connecting door was faulty. I was unaware the room was occupied. How convenient. This from a pale-haired woman named Dressa, whose father held the southern Pack territories. It was the opposite of convenient. Maren drank her tea. It was mortifying. "And yet here you sit." Isolde set down her cup. "Rather than returning to your tallow village." Maren considered the table of 59 women watching her. She thought about Torvak naming her in the village square because she was convenient to sacrifice. She thought about 30 miles on foot in 2 large boots. She thought about the way Cassian Drave had said you looked like you needed the sleep in a voice she was still, privately, working out what to do with. She thought about the river and the stone. "I'm still here because I still need the tithe writ," she said without heat. "The same as several of you need various other writs and settlements. This place is a transaction for most of the people in this room, including me. I haven't confused that with anything romantic." The silence that followed was interesting. A few of the women looked away. One, a small, dark-eyed girl near the end of the table named Pell, who had not yet spoken once in Maren's hearing, looked at her with an expression that might have been respect. Cassian Drave entered the breakfast room. He was rested, or at least looked it, changed into riding clothes, some composure reassembled. His eyes moved down the table and found Maren at the far end, with the accuracy of something navigating by instinct. He sat at the head of the table and spoke pleasantly to Isolde about Heron Point's tidal politics, and Maren ate her bread and watched the tapestries again and thought about the fact that she should not have told him the river saying. It was too honest. Honesty in rooms like this one was like leaving a door unlocked. Chapter 5. The war in his face. On the second afternoon, the candidates were given leave to walk the citadel grounds, a snow-dusted plateau behind the main structure, with a view down the mountain face, so severe it was nearly theatrical. Most of the women walked in clusters, working the social architecture of a situation they had trained for. Maren went to the edge of the plateau and looked at the mountain, and thought about going home. Except she didn't have a home to go to, only a room above a tallow maker and a debt to a village that had already decided her worth. "My war council says I should have made a selection by now." She had heard him coming. Not well, but enough, because she had excellent hearing even without a wolf. She did not turn around. "Then perhaps you should." He came to stand beside her, at a polite distance, looking at the same view. Up close she could see that his hands, where they rested on the stone railing, had the particular stillness of someone suppressing motion, a restlessness held quiet by practice. "I've been choosing women to meet for 2 years," he said, "at my council's insistence. My war is finished, the territory is stable. I need an alliance mate and heirs. These are the facts of my position." "I understand facts. I don't think I've spoken to anyone honestly in 2 years." He paused. "That is an embarrassing thing to say to a stranger." "I told a strange king my grandmother's river saying at 4 a.m. in my stockinged feet. We may have already forfeited the ordinary standards of embarrassment." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but the close ancestor of one. The women downstairs are all remarkable. They are. Several of them are genuinely extraordinary. Isolde of Heron Point is formidably intelligent, whatever else she is. Pell, the quiet one, shifts into a winter wolf, and I think she's the most powerful person in that hall, and nobody's noticed yet. He turned to look at her directly. You've been studying them. I notice things. I don't have a wolf, so I pay attention to what I can actually perceive. She met his eyes. Dark and direct and carrying the war he'd mentioned, not as damage, but as weight. Someone had asked him to hold a great deal for a long time. You have people who advise you on territory and governance and alliance-making. Do any of them advise you on what you actually want? The question landed in the cold air between them. He was quiet long enough that she wondered if she'd gone too far. It was easy to forget, in a conversation that felt like fresh water, that she was speaking to a king who owed her nothing and could dismiss her with a gesture. No, he said at last. They don't. Then that seems like the more significant problem. He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt it the way you feel a river's current. Not painful, not frightening, but real. Undeniably real. What do you want, Maren Voss? Nobody had ever asked her that. Not Torvak, not the tallow maker, not anyone in Callow Bend, or anywhere she'd lived before Callow Bend. The question was so unexpected that she had to look back at the mountain to answer it. I want to stop being convenient, she said. I want to be somewhere I'm not an arrangement. I want to... She touched the pebble at her throat briefly. I want to stop begging the stone to notice. The wind came up off the mountain, cold and decisive. The river sang, he said quietly. Yes. She went back inside before he could say anything else. Her heart was doing something she did not have permission to examine yet. Chapter 6. What the Stone Decided. The third and final dinner was not like the first. There was a formality to it. The steward's bearing telegraphed a decision was imminent, and the tension among the 59 women was a physical thing, pressing against the smoke-darkened tapestries. Isolde was exquisite, in dark red. Pell had braided her hair back. Dressa wore the look of someone who had already written her preferred ending. Maren wore the moss-green dress because it was the only dress she had. The food came and went. Wine was poured. Conversation moved in the careful channels of people aware they are being watched. Maren ate and watched the candle flames and tried to make peace with whatever the morning would bring. She would take the tithe writ home. She would pay Torvak's debt. She would find some other rented room in some other village, and she would keep the pebble and remember the saying, and she would be all right. She believed this. Mostly. Cassian Drave stood. The table went very quiet. This was the moment. Every woman in the room understood it. The moment of selection or dismissal. I want to say something before I give the steward his instructions. His voice was even, but it had that quality she'd noticed on the plateau, the quality of someone choosing honesty as a deliberate act. I came to this process expecting to choose rationally, a good alliance, a capable partner. These are reasonable things to want. Isolde straightened. Dressa folded her hands. 3 nights ago, someone fell asleep in my chambers by accident. The room went absolutely still. I sat in a chair for 4 hours rather than wake her, which was probably peculiar behavior for a king, and which my council would consider a dereliction of something. But I want to explain what I was thinking during those 4 hours. Maren was very still. I was thinking that I have not once, in 2 years of councils and campaigns and choosing ceremonies, been in a room with someone who was simply resting, at ease, not performing anything for my benefit, not calculating. Just present, asleep with a river pebble around her neck. He paused. It was the most honest thing I had seen in 2 years, and I realized I had been starving for honesty without knowing it. Isolde turned slowly to look at Maren. The look was complicated, and, Maren thought, not without fairness. Isolde was intelligent enough to recognize a real thing when she saw it, even when it cost her. The tithe writs will be issued to all candidates tomorrow morning. Cassian's eyes found Maren's across the length of the table, and they stayed. but I am asking one person to stay." Marin's heart became a river. She felt it, the current, the movement, the complete impossibility of stillness. "Marin Voss," he said. "Stay." She did not answer immediately. She pressed one hand flat to the table. She pressed the other to the pebble at her throat. "The stone is changed," her grandmother had said. "Under one condition," she said. Every head in the room swiveled. "Name it." "I stay as myself, not as a tithe, not as an arrangement, not as something convenient." She held his gaze across all 59 pairs of ears. "I stay because I choose to." The fire snapped in the hearth. "Those are the only terms I would offer," Cassian said. Chapter 7. After the 59. They left in the morning, gracious and ungracious in varying degrees. Isolde paused at the gate and looked back at Marin. A long, measuring look, and then nodded once, which was more respect than Marin had expected, and which she received with a straight back. Pell, passing, pressed her hand briefly and smiled. The citadel became quieter. Marin found that she preferred it. She was given different rooms, not the faulty locked candidate room, but a set of chambers higher in the citadel's east tower, with a window full of mountain and enough shelf space for books she didn't yet own. She understood she was not being kept in luxury. She was being kept in space, room to exist without crowding, and she valued that more than silk. The council was not pleased. She heard about it second-hand from a quiet steward named Wev, who had taken a liking to her directness. The alliance value of a wolfless tithe girl from a debtor village was, according to the council, approximately nothing. They were not wrong about the politics. She told Wev to tell the council that she wasn't their political problem and wasn't trying to be. Cassian found her in the Citadel's library 3 days after the departure of the 59, in a deep chair near the window, with a history of the Ashvale territories that was older than any book she'd previously touched. They talked for 4 hours, about the territories, about the war he had fought and what it had cost people who were not him, about her grandmother and the mountains of Callow Bend and what it felt like to live without a wolf in a world built for those who had one. She told him it was like being a river in a landscape that only acknowledged the rocks. He said, very quietly, that he thought he might have been one of those rocks. "You're noticing the current now," she said. "That's what matters." He did not reach for her. He did not rush anything. He was careful again, that characteristic carefulness, as though she were something worth being careful with. She had not been treated carefully in so long that she wasn't sure at first what to call it. Then she recognized it as the correct name: respect. Slowly, over the weeks that followed, Draveth Citadel changed its character around her. Not because she asked it to, because she flowed, quiet, persistent, undeniable, and the stone began inevitably to be shaped. She found Wev reading in a corner and told him he should ask the council to let him attend the territorial hearings, because he had better political instincts than 2 of the 3 advisors, and they were wasting him. Wev attended the hearings. Cassian noticed. The council, annoyed, noticed also. She requested that the candidate rooms be made into permanent guest quarters for visiting pack representatives, which improved every subsequent negotiation in the Citadel, because visitors stopped feeling like supplicants waiting for a verdict. This was, politically speaking, worth more than several alliances. She walked the grounds in her 2 large boots, which she had kept because she had nothing else, and Cassian walked beside her and talked about things he had not said to anyone. The war, the cost of it, the nights he had not slept. "You keep the boots," he said one morning, looking down at them. "They're the only pair I have. I know, but I've walked 30 miles in them. They've earned staying." He looked at her then, with the particular quality she had stopped trying not to name, wanting and warmth, and something underneath both of those that was simply recognition. The look of someone who sees you clearly and is glad of what they see. The first time he kissed her, it was in the library, in the late afternoon, with the mountain's shadow long across the window, and it was gentle and certain, and tasted like someone choosing honestly for perhaps the first time in a long time. She kissed him back with the entirety of herself, which she had always had, and which had always been enough. Chapter 8. What holds the council capitulated in degrees, the way stone always does, not dramatically, not all at once, but grain by grain under persistent water. First, because Maren had quietly solved the Eastern Territory grain dispute by pointing out that the 3 villages in conflict were arguing over a mill that none of them actually needed if the trade route were rerouted 2 miles north. A fact obvious to anyone who had grown up navigating poverty's logistics and entirely invisible to advisors who had not. Then, because the representative from the Mirath Pack had arrived hostile and left with a signed agreement, and the only variable was that Maren had met him in the courtyard before the formal hearing, and simply talked to him about the mountains, because he missed his own mountains and nobody had thought to notice. Then, because Pell, the quiet woman from the selection who had returned to her pack territories, sent a letter addressed specifically to Maren, describing her as the only person at that citadel with any actual sense, and Pell's father commanded 12,000 wolves, and his opinion of Draveth had accordingly improved. The council still thought the match was irregular. They were correct. They had stopped suggesting it was a mistake. On the night of the new moon, the same new moon by which the selection was supposed to have ended, Cassian asked Maren to walk with him to the highest point of the citadel, a stone platform at the tower's peak where the whole of the Ashvale Range was visible in every direction, and where the stars were so close they seemed to be part of the mountain's argument with the sky. He had no speech prepared. She could tell. He was not the kind of man whose honesty worked well with scripts. He stood with the wind moving his dark hair and the scar along his jaw silver in the starlight, and he looked at her with the recognition she had stopped trying not to receive. "I don't have a wolf to offer you," he said. "I know that's not what you... I know you don't. Cassian," he stopped. "I am not here about wolves." She touched the pebble at her throat. "I'm here because this is the first place I have ever been where someone asked what I wanted." "What do you want?" She smiled, and it was not small or careful or performed, or it was her actual smile, the one she had stopped offering to people who wouldn't notice it. "I want this," she said. "You, this mountain, the library, and the terrible council and Wev's excellent political instincts. The boots, because I'm keeping the boots." She stepped forward, into the wind, into his warmth. "I want to stay because I choose to. That's still the condition." "Those," he said, and his hands were at her waist, careful and certain at once, "are still the only terms I would offer." The mountain held them both. The stars were unchanged. The stone was changed entirely. Epilogue. 1 year later, there is a saying among the wolf women of the Ashvale Mountains. A river does not beg the stone to notice its current. It simply flows, and the stone is changed. Maren Drave, Alpha Queen of the Draveth territories, heard it for the 2nd time in her adult life on the morning of her 1st anniversary, spoken back to her by her grandmother, who had made the journey from Callow Bend on a cart Maren had sent, because she was damned if she was going to let the old woman walk 30 miles. They were in the library, Maren's library now, reorganized into a functional order that still made the council vaguely anxious, with tea and early light coming hard and clean through the mountain window. "You understand it now," her grandmother said. It was not a question. "I think I always understood it." Maren wrapped both hands around her cup. "I just didn't believe I was a river. I thought I was a stone, waiting to be noticed." "The stones that are rivers in disguise," her grandmother said, "are always the ones that change everything." At her throat, on its worn cord, the gray-green pebble rested warm against her skin. She had worn it every day of the past year, through the first council meeting in which she had spoken and been listened to, through the grain dispute and the Mirath negotiation, and the cold northern tour of 7 pack territories where she had shaken hands in 2 large boots and been met with confusion that became, consistently, respect. She had worn it through the night that Cassian had spoken quietly into her hair about the last battle of his war and wept without apology, and through the morning after when the citadel had felt, for the first time, like something genuinely healed. She wore it now at the anniversary breakfast when Cassian came into the library carrying a small carved box, and wearing the look of someone who had been planning something longer than she'd known. Inside the box, set in a slim ring of dark iron, not gold, he had asked her about metal, and she had said something real, something that won't pretend to be other than what it is, was a setting shaped exactly like a river stone. Not holding a gem. Holding a smooth, gray-green piece of Ashvale river stone, polished and fitted and permanent. "Your grandmother helped me," he said. "She sent me the match for your pebble." Same river? Same stone bed? Maren looked at the ring for a long time. Then she looked at him, dark-eyed, scarred, present, hers, and felt the current of herself, clear and unimpeded, moving against something that had chosen to be changed. She put the ring on her own hand, slowly, deliberately, the way you do a thing you've chosen. "The stone is changed," her grandmother said from her chair, entirely pleased with herself. Maren laughed, her real laugh, the whole one, and Cassian caught her hand between both of his, the ring and the pebble and the worn cord, the river stone and the river. 30 miles of bad road and 4 hours in a chair and every honest word since. The Citadel's bells rang the morning hour across the mountains. The stone held. The river flowed. Everything, finally, was changed. End.